about bond. And Joe, I don't know if you'll know the answer. When the city, I'm wondering if the city needs to go through a similar process to the school district, in that we need to go through the Treasury Department, declare what we're spending our money on. Like, do we need to be pretty far along in the process of deciding what facility a bond will support, before we can put it on the ballot?
Yeah, we should have, excuse me, we should have an idea, and Steve Mann, who was here last week, would work with a bond advisor for us. We should have an idea about what facility we specifically want to improve, and we should be far enough along with more of a generalized budget. Right now, I'm not comfortable, so I will share with you tomorrow. I have a speculative call with just a firm that specializes in public safety design, and I'm going to find out what is the low-cost risk for me, just to get a firm that can give me a better experienced cost definition for a public safety facility. So I'm doing that preemptively right now, and I think I'm going to do it regardless on the rec facility too, because we've already secured the money from the state to pay for it. So actually, I'm putting out an RFP for a parks design company to actually spec out and phase out that recreation facility. So we can, phase one will be, paying for things using the money we've already secured, very low risk things. So adding public restrooms, right, and adding some of those things. But the Valade Park facility, maybe we just hold out on that, and that would be the voter question. But we will have the specific numbers and the specific millage for them, hopefully by May. And then whether we use it or not, that's really a council question. But we'll have that. Do we want to take a break, or just, it's 6:45? We are now live on Candid Camera. That was a deep reference. I just realized that. Oh my goodness. Oh man. No. We're now live on the TikTok.
They take.
No, just kidding. So I should actually stop because we are live. So IT did come back, so I will pull up the presentation for those of you who are just now joining us. We had an IT disruption, so now we are fully broadcasting, but this is a public meeting and it remains a public meeting. So I will begin with a recap. Well, before I begin with the recap, I want to walk through the scenarios because I was able to adjust the scenarios to include one property example that was a non-homestead property. And so we did get that far along. And so I will just kind of go from first option just for the public's benefit of repeating what was reviewed last week. So we looked at anonymous houses last week. This actually is in the printer still, so I will give this to you at the break. For property one, we looked at what it looks like to have a disparity between the state equalized value and the taxable value for property owned for a long period of time. So this is a 24-year long home. You can see all of the different scenarios, and we did that same scenario. Property two, this is 8 years. You can see the impacts, and this is all available in tonight's packet too for the public benefit. Property three would be 1 year in the home, so this was a relatively newly purchased home. So we have some equal values between the state equalized value and the taxable value. And we closed with property four, which shows you that's a newer development. They've been there 5 years in the home. So that's an example. The state equalized value is 50% of the likely market value. So you can imagine that house probably had a purchase price around $450,000. And that tax situation is different. The tax situation is different for all based on the tenure in the home and the general character of the home. Now, tonight is, the committee asked us to bring back an example of a non-homestead rental. And this is a little bit of a lag, so it should show up in a second. There it is. This homestead was purchased within the last 5 years. This is a newer development as well. This is an example of a non-homestead. So the state equalized value is 92,000, and the taxable value is 83. The differences are their 2023 taxes, and this is actual, was 5,953. If you reduce, if this was a homesteaded property, it would be about $1,000 difference in the tax bill. I do have that from the deputy finance director available to show. So here you can see the example of no millage. The partial renewal itself, again, that's just you sustain what is current. The facilities adds about $208. Partial facilities, the partial and facilities would be, sustaining your current value and then adding $220. And then a full would be about $333 in additional taxes that year. That would be a facilities bond. So one ballot initiative for a facilities bond and a second ballot initiative for partial Headley override.
Sorry. In a way to get the same result, but not just by doing it the Hadley way. I haven't talked about those other options. One way or the other. That's what my gut tells me.
I have a question in general. I guess that's my, maybe it is commercial, special bond, it's, raising us, if we do the full and, is the specificity of where the money's going versus how we're wording it versus how we're communicating, et cetera, is that $200 to $800 significant enough?
People are afraid of the raised taxes because still spending the money. Yeah. And I do think it is significant.
That seems like a good segue to kind of recap the question here, the root of the question, which is based from Proposal A and tax law, Proposal A and Headley. So last week, the committee asked for us to bring back kind of a recap. So I mashed up Oakland County's presentation and my own presentation, and I trimmed a little bit out to try to focus on the recap points. So our objective, we were talking about property tax implications today. We've talked about staffing levels and government service levels over the past several months. We've also focused on the Facilities Task Force report, their recommendations, and we heard from the chair in October. And today, this month, we're really focusing on that question of property tax implications. So I want to begin again, for the benefit of the public watching, defining terms, we're going to start with property assessments in Proposal A. So I adapted Oakland County and I visualized the timeline a little bit. And so there was a question, at what point, if I pull a building permit to improve my house, when does that get counted? And so I tried to show you how that looks like in the calendar year, this green box. So really the assessor's office is doing inspections between spring and fall. And they have to file any changes by December 31st. So whatever the assessor has of your house at December 31st is going to be the snapshot picture of your taxable value at that point in time. And you can see we begin there. So a couple weeks from now, December 31st is tax day for assessors. So that's really when they would be filing their original paperwork to all the cities of the property profiles as they know it today. So if you built a deck in August, it should be likely captured by now if you pull the permit. They have to notice property assessments in mail, and in March, that is, yep.
But that doesn't completely, an improvement to your home, does that completely uncap your assessment, or does it just incrementally?
No, to clarify, yeah, that is not connected to uncapping. That is just a change in the value of your home. And that could be based on a deletion as well. If you get rid of a garage and replace it with yard, they're going to actually likely reduce the value of your home. So in February, they would notice all homeowners a picture of their assessed property at that moment in time from December. And in March, residents have an opportunity to petition your fellow residents who serve on a local board of review. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say we are looking for local board of review applicants. So let me know, anyone watching or anyone on this finance committee, Phil is trying to fill those seats. How many seats do you have? 2 vacancies, right? 2 vacancies. And we are obligated to provide that, and it must be a citizen. So thank you for your service, hopefully. We'll see you soon. So in March, the local board of review hears protests about valuations. They do work with Oakland County. So Brian, who was presented in October, he is there with you. And he actually answers most of the technical questions, and he gives the basis for those conversations. So you're not just giving your gut feeling on an appraisal. At that point, any changes would be filed and sent to the state for appeals. And the state actually handles that vis-a-vis the Michigan Tax Tribunal. So that's really mostly out of our wheelhouse, that's being determined up at the state. All that said, by the time it's summer, that's your summer tax bill. So your summer tax bill should reflect what we know to be true as of December 31st about your property. And then the whole process repeats itself on an annual basis. This is really all handled at Oakland County and in Phil's office. We are not involved too much on this. They provide an example of key terms from them. Their headline here, really, in talking about the next few slides, is, again, they don't chase market sales. They explain why they don't do that. But they really do go on the comp example and look at true comps, and then that is kind of the test of an assessed value. So really, proposally the best visual example of that, again, is the example I thought they presented in October, which is very effective. You have 2 houses. This is a very, I think, understandable situation in Ferndale that look pretty much the same. They're both post-World War houses, both similar on square footage. Only one was purchased more recently. So you have a long-term homeowner versus a new homeowner. And you can see how the Proposal A formula benefits long-term homeowner, as it was intended to do. But they didn't really think about generational change. And so that really shifts the housing burden completely on the next generation. And the result here is a almost $3,000 difference in your tax bill for the same property style. The key takeaways: the Citizen Research Council is a nonprofit independent that just researches and opines on tax law across all 50 states. And in Michigan, the CRC did a technical review of Proposal A, and they don't really have a preference. They're just an independent organization. And so they're really, there are two key things that Oakland County highlighted is that Proposal A dramatically shifted the way local school districts are funded by now primarily funding local school districts through the sales tax. So sales tax was increased, and as sales tax was increased, the trade-off for that would be reducing the local burden of property taxes on homeowners and incentivizing long-term homeownership by creating the capped formula. This led to the standard of taxable values being created and then the state equalized value. Those two things didn't have to be in existence before Proposal A was passed. So defining the terms, so Headley Amendment and city tax base, and I think this is important because I think Proposal A and Headley get conflated sometimes and confused for one another. We know that this was a constitutional amendment from 1978. We know that the goal of this was to really control the growth of a community's property tax base as an aggregate. So Proposal A is focused on the individual property, and Headley is concerned with with constraining the city's growth, the tax base growth, all of the tax base together, all the properties together. We know that 75% of the city of Ferndale's community property tax base is residential. And so that means, with the understanding that Headley constrains the growth of our tax base, and Proposal A is constraining or creating the pinch point on the next generation of homeowners, we know where the impact is going to be in Ferndale, and it's going to be primarily put on the residential population. That's just because of our city tax base. 75% is residential with a small mixture of commercial and industrial properties to augment that. Here's a breakdown of our assessed value. Here we show this is the actual comp value of all of city's property, of all of our property. So about $1.3 billion is the aggregate value of our property, but not the taxable value. The taxable value is about $877 million. So that's a big distinction. $1.3 billion is the actual value. The taxable value is $877 million. That's a substantial, that is a really good illustration of the impact of Headley and Proposal A on the city's tax base. Here we saw really what that looks like when they work in tandem. So when we have a 2008 recession that ultimately really kills property values, what that does is lowered the floor for our properties. So a house that might have been before that valued at $100,000, and if it was purchased in 2013 at a low purchase price of $50,000, well, now we just lowered the floor of that tax bill. And we know that it can only increase at the rate of inflation, or 5%, and for a decade, the inflation rate was less than 2% on average. So getting your revenues back took a long time. And actually here we saw, it took us about 11 years to get back to our taxable value from 2009. So we just now equalized in 2020 during the pandemic. That was the first time we actually caught back up. Our low point was in 2014. And here you can see our growth beginning with the taxable value changes. And of course, we know that that growth is going to be constrained and it's going to be rolled back. We talk about the pop-ups for the uncapped properties. We can see the number of transfers on average in Ferndale since 2015. All we can see and all they can really provide is the number of uncappings. They can't tell you if that's the same property that's uncapping multiple times. And as we know, the significant uncapping happens when there's a change in ownership for the first time in a long time. But if a property was purchased low in 2013 or 14 and then flipped in 2017, that second uncapping is going to be less minimal. And the first uncapping is really going to not, it's going to be kind of negligent because they bought really low, which a lot of people did do. And here you can kind of see the aggregate. This is, this shows you on the left side, Oakland County provided the valuation of those uncappings. So on an annual basis, you can see year over year. Last year, for example, the uncappings resulted in an increase in $34 million. If you add that to the city's aggregate tax base, it's $821 million. So it increased it a proportion, but I would say it's not a 50% increase of the tax base, and I think you can see that. So 34 million, Phil, if you got a calculator, 34 million divided by 821 million. And that's the percentage increase last year. That's the impact of the uncapping property taxes. Does that make sense? So I'll recap the state of Michigan property tax laws. Prop A controls growth at the individual property level, and then the Headley Amendment sits on top of that and rolls the city's tax base back. So when the city is doing well and we're getting a lot of uncappings and a lot of new population moving in, those revenues are constrained by the rate of inflation and then rolled back. Then our millage rate is rolled back to make sure that our revenues aren't growing concurrent with the market condition, that our revenues are constrained to inflation. My subjective opinion, your long-term residents benefit, really, because the disparity between the long-term residents and the new residents, you're paying for the same services. You both have the same number of police officers patrolling your streets. It's just one of you is paying double. And so the benefit really is a long-term resident is kind of buffered from that as long as they stay in the house. No. Yeah. The Headley would structurally lower the taxes. So in that case, if you have 10% of your long-term residents leaving and all those properties hopefully get purchased, they're all going to uncap, but that new revenue is going to trigger, it's going to impact our rollback factor, right? And so our Headley rollback is going to be more substantial. And so if our mill rate is 15, and we have such growth, that mill is going to go down to 13, probably, or 14. And so they'll make sure that we can't really capture that all. We're going to be constrained in our growth to the inflation, whatever the inflation rate is. Don't feel guilty.
Through the chair, I think though that that's an important thing that I was talking with Brittany about last week, because I was having trouble wrapping my head around that, like, because, when I moved here in 2016, and the following February, my taxes were uncapped and they went up by a couple $1,000s, and I was like freaking out. My perception at the time was that the city was getting, a huge windfall from my property now being uncapped after having sat where it was for, I don't even know, but it was a while. So that, though, I think is probably a pretty common and understandable, like, assumption that people make. So I think that that's one thing that I've learned just from being here, that I would make an educated guess that none of my neighbors really would know. Actually, probably not, because most of them have been in their homes for several decades. So, yeah. And Headley.
Ooh,
And again, the purpose is not to test you remotely. But, what did you stumble over?
state equalized. I think. No, SEV.
What's SET?
He leaves every time someone asks a finance question.
I think he's still here, so that's the good news.
We'll make him answer that when Phil gets back.
Back?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so we covered what we could from the and it seemed like there was a good conversation, right? So I just wonder. Here, where there was double or triple the number. Asking if there's a bottom, like, is there a
I don't know that it's designed to get ahead. It's designed to stay at the rate of inflation. So it's designed to not allow us to grow. They, again, subjective in my opinion, they didn't account for generational change, which is kind of inevitable with property transfers. So they've really created kind of pinch point by design. But aside from that, they didn't anticipate the massive social change in the past 20 years. Government didn't have to really account for sophisticated cybersecurity or IT or transparency like body cams. They didn't have to really think about that. And so we've had very costly, dramatic shifts in communications, in technology, in security, things that probably weren't thought about in 1994, right? Because we were still incrementally changing up to that point. We just got the internet. And in my opinion, just that's where the changes outpaced inflation tenfold in terms of how we had to be more sophisticated and responsive to a changing public. We didn't need to be that sophisticated with communications, no offense, Kara. We didn't need to be that sophisticated with police departments. Your IT budget was worried about internet connections for them. They weren't worried about cybersecurity, threat detection, network security, body camera data storage, cloud-based storage, and then the annual licensing fees. So the changes that have occurred in the last 20 years have far outpaced the rate of inflation. And that is the problem. The government is not what it was in 2005 or 1994. You can't make it so. You can't undo that. So it's a problem. Oh, boy. Mhm. What we're uncapping. So, right, yeah, I think you're looking at this. So 700 transfers, add it by 1.2%. So 20% more above 700, which is a huge. I think what would be most beneficial, because I have a thread of conversation with Oakland County right now. I think the Headley,
Where is this money?
I'm going to give a surge example to Brian in Oakland County, just because I've already asked for 5 things, I'll ask for a 6th. He's going to give it to me on Friday anyway, but generally, I mean, what I believe to be true is that the millage rate's going to get rolled back, so we won't be able to ever capture that. It's going to, that's above inflation. So if, it nets out. It's a public, your tax dollars are general public interest dollars to the benefit of the community. Each individual, that is local democratic government. So it really is to the benefit of the general fund, and it supports the general services that all properties who pay taxes benefit from. It's social.
So,
So with Headley, you could say,
that lower mill rate, what he's describing, that would cause taxes to go down, or the mill rate to go down for everybody. When does that happen? Is that the December 31st date?
the millage rate is going to be, we're going into a bunch of different directions. I'm concerned about, I don't want to be perceived as misdirecting
Okay.
anyone. Because we have a lot of parallel discussions. The millage rate, which is passed in April during the budget process, which is based on the budget that we present, based on the revenues coming in that we believe are coming in, the expenses. So, I think one thing, a simple way for me to think about it is that Headley gives you a ceiling. And so, if we can only go up by $100,000 as a city, I'm going to use a simple number. That's what we can go up to. So if all these properties uncap, it doesn't really matter because we can only get to this ceiling. So they're going to uncap, their money's going to go there, which means these other properties, they might increase by 6,000, they're going to increase by a dime. And so either way, we're going to net out at this bar. Does that make sense? Because it's the inflation rate. We're capped at the inflation rate as a community-wide tax base, all properties. So no matter what, we can't go past that bar. So if we uncap, a lot of those properties are going to get us to our money goal quicker. The remainder properties that are still in their homes, they won't really have a lot of change. That's the best way I can try to restate what I think I heard. Yes, I mean, the millage rate is always going to be rolled back as part of the Headley rollback. But to think that you could get Could you ever have, I think, Phil, the question for finance is, could you ever have a situation where you have a surge in uncapped property that gets you to your Headley limit pretty quick, that ultimately results in a reduction for long-term homeowners? But that's not going to be the case. They'll either be net neutral or have a very limited increase. Should be speaking, this is good knowledge you're dropping on.
The folks at home. But yeah, when Joe was basically explaining it correctly as far as what we're able to collect as a city, because we're going to be capped regardless. And that rollback it's going to happen every year regardless. It doesn't matter what the property value is going to be, that rollback is going to affect us and affect the amount that we are able to capture. And so a big misconception amongst common folks is just that, oh, we see all this development, we see all these homes going up for sale. That really has no impact on what we're able to capture. Now, for the folks who are in their homes already, who have tenure in their homes, I'll say 10 years or more, the effect that they're going to see in their actual property tax is going to be actually very minimal. They won't see it as much because they've been in their homes, and so the rollback is going to be minimal for them. For those folks who are in shorter terms, like 5 years or less, they just bought their homes or what have you, their taxable rate is going to be higher. So that's how you have those scenarios where you have two houses that look almost exactly the same. The person over here has been in their house 20 years, but the person over here has been in their house 5. The person that's been in their house 5 is probably going to pay 2 times more taxes than the person that's been in their house for 20 years. So regardless of the escalation of the taxable value, we're still going to be limited as far as what we can capture as a city and use for general operating. Does that kind of get to your question?
And through the chair, can I ask, to that last comment, is that also true with the Headley override?
As far as,
If they
as
were
far,
to approve a Headley
Right.
override, would what you say be true?
yes, because, and think of it like this, regardless of whether or not the voters approve the Headley override, we're still, the Headley override is not going away. So we're still going to have that rollback factor. So if we don't vote it, then that means that additional money that would have been allowed for us to capture with that override, it just goes away. And so if the Headley override is already down, then that's going to reduce the amount that we can capture, and it's going to reduce our operating revenues.
So I want to add to that because I met with Joe earlier today to ask about this because I was confused about, like, our max is 20 mils. And if we pass a Headley override, that means we can override to get us up to that 20. But Joe, you said the last time that the Headley override was passed in 2015, that was on the ballot, I think, in November. Then immediately after that, in December the following year, the rollback was triggered. So we never actually even hit that 20. So it's immediately started rolling back even with the override. So the override doesn't always guarantee that we're at that 20. It just, we still have the rollbacks even if the override is.
Yeah, so using your scenario, that 20 mills, that max, it can be voted in, and when the millages are voted on in spring, say April, May, it will be at the 20. But as soon as we get to that first tax date, you're right, it's going to go right back down. So, and then that cycle starts again until we continue to go down unless we do something else with respect to financing, whether we issue bonds after the fact or we come back to the voters and try to get it passed again. So, but your assumption is right.
And I think we can use the 2015 millage example today because we know that our millage with the voter-approved millage is about 15 mils. But the voters approved a full override in 2015, so at one point in 2015, we're at 15 mils. So the millage rate is always going to continually roll back. So after this, if hypothetically they approve a partial, that would keep the 5 mils, and your tax bill would be 5 mils. And then the next year would be 4.95 mils and 4.9, and it's going to continue to roll back. So it will always kind of neutralize the growth. And if nothing changes and facilities aren't a need, then that theory might work out. You know, and again, between 2015 and 2025, a lot of things have changed. We've also, not just the technology side, not just the communication side, but now you have the generational workforce change. So your pensions, your police and fire pensions, you have a lot more retiring in the workforce side that are owed pensions that were approved in the 80s. And so those pension obligations are increasing. So our annual contributions are increasing. So I think the assumptions that Proposal A and Headley had were of a static workforce that didn't really ever change, and it assumed the government was always going to be generally the same box of services in perpetuity. And they didn't think about any of the generational changes on the workforce side, on the residential side, and they certainly didn't pay attention to Moore's Law for all you IT fans.
Through the chair, so I know we're going in a lot of different directions, Joe. Kate asked a question regarding, like, how do we get ahead? And one of the other things that I always wondered about is, you know, because Ferndale is a smaller city, for instance, like with police, the cost of training the workforce, right? The appropriate level of training that is required to maintain your police services. In a bigger city like Detroit, because of the sheer size of it and the population, there's a lot of entitlement funding that rolls in to train police officers in Detroit. That can't happen with Ferndale because of the sheer size of it. The entitlement funding really helps to offset a lot of the costs of the services.
I think in order for all the smaller cities as a region to get ahead, I think the concept of regional government is going to be inevitable. As a professional, that's my opinion. I think every community we know participates and is impacted by Headley, is impacted by Proposal A. So we all have the same common revenue constraints, and we all have the same service demands. So I would guess 30 years from now, we will have consolidated city services or consolidated cities, much like Louisville, Jefferson County. That's the most recent major city consolidation, where you had a county and a city consolidate to, they did the study, and they just saw the efficiencies of consolidating the county cities. I don't know that Oakland County would do that, but I wouldn't be surprised to see, 20 to 30 years from now, Madison Heights, Ferndale, Royal Oak, Opolis, in terms of services. I think that, we can't control the revenues. So the only thing you can do to get ahead would be think about service delivery a little bit differently, which is also a mental trick for voters in each community that has to do that. But this is theory now.
Through the chair, can I ask I don't know, question or not? Are there any large governmental changes that would cause Prop A and Headley to go away or change or give cities more options in the future currently?
100% the legislature's responsibility.
Correct.
So no,
Okay.
we know that there's proposals that have been bandied about, but to my knowledge, they haven't gotten out of committee work, which means they're not serious for a vote.
Okay, thank you. If we're thinking in 10-year chunks, right, 20-year chunks,
For sure.
whatever that may be, in 20 years, are we gonna have better, or in 10 years, if we have to come back and try and do this again, are we gonna have better options for our options, is I guess. other options for our options, not to be.
I would, no matter what proposal, I would be recommending tonight, and I will be recommending to the next city council that we begin looking at reigniting feasibility studies and exploring regional openness, partners that are open to regional, and kind of identifying services that are opportunities. We know that that doesn't solve tomorrow's problem, but to solve tomorrow's problem, we need to be thinking about, Oakland County 2050. What does it look like?
Services that cost each individual city or municipality the most amount of money. What?
Yeah, you're looking at your shared common services, your common problems. So public safety is a great example because the number of next generation people interested in the field is waning. So that just means we're all competing for the smaller same pot of people, and that's going to drive up wages, which will continue to outpace inflation because of just basic supply and demand markets. So that's an example of where if we could get to a place where we are all one entity that are negotiating with a larger contract, and that changes the recruiting dynamics, right? But that can't happen overnight, and that requires buy-in from all parties involved. So that's something you have to work on over time, but it has to be a commitment you make from a vision standpoint up front.
But that's a real world, fairly recent example of that type of thing. Okay.
Offline over the next month? Any that you would take off the table?
Yeah, I think, I do want to encourage us to really actually like our personal lists and then come back together, kind of putting those all on big lists and saying, okay, yes, do we agree that these are all the strengths and the challenges of this particular option? Because what I heard as I talked to some, I feel like I just need to see things side by side by side. And so I think the way that we're going to do that, what do I think the strengths and challenges are of this option? I think the strengths and challenges are of this. There's going to be trade-offs. Absolutely. But I do ask that you spend some time taking some notes and writing down thoughts so that when we come in and put it all together, it's a really comprehensive list.
Oh, we
Have to do this. So practice makes perfect. And also I think it's a hard task. maybe you all have been across the table. Oh, great, yeah, maybe 1, 2, 3.
Walked right into that one.
I would like to be buddies with Jeff.
Okay, you can be buddies with Jeffrey. I guess it's like the playground where you like.
I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
All right, so I'll leave you to your own devices. And if that means that 2 people.
I was gonna say,
It
I
might be
want
about
to with
one.
Kimberly because
connected with her a
I have
lot.
never connected
Yeah.
with you on anything, but we have very similar thoughts, and I like every time you talk, I was like,
I think it's great.
I'll come there with my stack.
I was really impressed.
Public, I figured like.
Yeah, thank. I feel like. And I was exposed.
That was the only thing.
Anyway, but you know, exactly. So.
Such a helpful visual. I find myself sometimes.
No. And so, my thought, where is mine today?
Backtracking.
Probably on me individually.
Y'all need to get in the box. I don't want to hear one. Monday morning at 9 a.m. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Levels of,
I'm thinking about putting the kid back in his room.
Oh, exactly the same.
Puppy's a lot easier.
you know, all of that, and tapping it, certain amount, and then
I am not. I think
our options of
There's a great
I
garden.
can't even take the video.
extending and
Their little tails.
I'm in like share stuff.
on.
And
Override.
there'll be like one on the bottom. No, they get to do whatever they want. On top of the other one. Always one like stuck.
I was like, okay, yeah.
Cute. This makes so much sense.
Go, you know, to hop all the way down to 14 or 12 or whatever that. Match the percent of
Yes, out of the box.
I'm collecting all of this money because all this stuff. Like,
And that was like,
no, you don't even get any.
Short, long, that's what. No. Nope, no, you roll back immediately. So. We're considering doing up to 14 with the pork. They'll get a start immediately rolling back as well. That's where my question. Yeah, where is there a population? Good. Right? Burdening. Trying to
Basically, it's just.
yeah, because like that's very established. I just joined in. Everywhere I've ever done safety elsewhere. I see even more. Our injury rates going down. In here forever. So the young, are coming in and making the city vibrant and want the arts and want these markets. That are high.
Yeah, which is just like, here's your rights. Have fun with fending off. Spending more time on this.
So it's all.
Oh, it's up for you.
Ken Burns fan?
Every moment is our part of the story.
Okay.
Blame it on realtors.
Anyway? They're all crazy. Writers are crazy.
Yeah. I was like, dude, what? Up. Like 500%? Really? Okay.
Let's be clear, we're on vacation visiting my dad. So like contacts, we're not like.
You're in Wisconsin.
To be honest, you didn't have to explain. You're like, no, that sounds good. Right. should come back together, because otherwise we won't.
Yes.
The worse it gets.
All right, we're coming back together, guys.
Where you are, if you'd like, or you can go. All right. Brooke, really? Where did y'all get checked out?
We know everything.
You know everything, yeah.
You read Joe's slide perfectly, out
Yeah.
loud to each other, and discussed the perceptions that have been debunked, especially today. I think a lot about there is a ceiling. We can never go above it, and it starts lowering. It's Indiana Jones, it's, you know, Star Wars, however you want to look at that wall coming down, whatever. It's coming down immediately, and those spikes start showing. There you go, I just saw. So you've got the ceilings coming down the minute you say, yay, let's do this. It's not there, right? Like, as much as we love this city and we love everything about, you know, the good parts of the services that we're providing, those of us who have been here longer feel guilty about the burden we're putting on those newbies. So how can we keep them excited about staying in Ferndale with all of these great things and asking them to pay more of a share of it, even with all of the ways that we can try and give this information to them?
I think this is like a common theme that I've heard tonight and last week too, is like, we need to show people, because Kyle mentioned this last week too, like, how is this going to benefit you? Particularly the folks who are burdened the most by it, the folks who are coming in and moving here brand new, and their pop-ups are crazy high, and yeah.
I'm not gonna judge.
Ferndale is a wonderful city to garden in. Lots of gardening groups.
Did you talk about animals?
Chicken
Check,
eggs.
you live in Ferndale, I'm aware now. I wasn't sure, but you verified your resident status.
Ducks and gardens.
Yeah. Is there anything else relevant for the topic at hand today?
We did do a check-in towards the end, the overall. I think say there's I know the city of Detroit has best comparison, but property tax, let's say garage startup and whatever. Is there anything?
I missed the hypothetical.
If there was a business boom and would any of that money go to the city of Ferndale outside?
That would likely result in an increase in your property values, which are going to be capped and hit that bar. I think if there's a commercial boom or an industrial boom, that's where you'd have to look at the sales tax as or income tax as an issue. As long as your commercial economy and industrial economy is strong enough to withstand that, and your city is, in my view, an economic magnet, and it's not going to be something, it's going to be a sustained investment in your commercial status as a building. What we don't want is to impose an income tax and not be strong enough in terms of a commercial industrial industry where those businesses just move out to a city that doesn't charge them income taxes. So the Ferndale has to be strong enough and attractive enough to have a business say, that doesn't matter, we want to be here anyways, regardless of the competitive advantages of relocating elsewhere. For sure. Yes. And honestly, stronger, so it again goes back to that slide, 75% of our tax base is residential. So if we're able to expand our industrial value, that's going to offset a lot of the focus on the residential. And that's, if you remember back in October, I had talked about in the master land use plan identifies an industrial strategy. And our commercial strategies as well are important.
All right, well, thank you all for your time tonight.
All right.
So we had a
and,
question on
there are
SET. What does that mean to them?
That's the amount.
All right. There are no members of the public here this evening to give public comment, so I will take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Alvita, seconded by Brooke. All in favor? All right, motion carries. Have a good evening. We are adjourned at 8:04.